97% of children stop crying within 30 seconds when offered comfort by a maternal figure. They seek warmth, they seek safety, they seek the primal reassurance that someone will protect them from the world's sharp edges. At 8:47 p.m. on a rain-soaked Tuesday in October, 6-year-old Enzo Torino had been sobbing in the corner booth of Benedetto's for 43 minutes straight, and not one person in that marble-floored cathedral of Italian cuisine had been able to offer him what he needed. Maya Chen wiped down table 12 for the third time in 5 minutes, her movements precise despite the exhaustion that had settled into her bones like lead. 28 years old and already feeling ancient, she moved through Benedetto's dining room with the practiced invisibility of someone who had learned early that being seen meant being vulnerable. Her black uniform hung loose on her frame, the fabric cheap and practical, a stark contrast to the silk dresses and tailored suits that populated the restaurant's leather banquettes. The scent of garlic and basil couldn't quite mask the metallic tang of desperation that seemed to follow her everywhere these days. Her grandmother's medical bills sat unpaid on her kitchen table. Rent was due in 4 days. The second job at the coffee shop barely covered groceries. Maya's hands remained steady as she folded napkins into perfect triangles, muscle memory overriding the panic that lived just beneath her sternum. The child's wails cut through the soft murmur of expensive conversation like a blade through silk. Maya's eyes drifted to the corner booth where the boys sat surrounded by men in dark suits, their faces granite hard with the particular stillness that came from carrying concealed weapons. A woman in her 50s, wearing pearls and panic in equal measure, knelt beside the booth making increasingly desperate attempts at comfort. The nanny, Maya realized, hired help like herself, but paid far better for far less success. "Enzo, please," the woman whispered, her Italian accent thick with frustration. "Your papa will be here soon. You must be brave." The boy's response was another heart-wrenching sob that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. Maya had seen crying children before, had comforted dozens during her 3 years of foster homes before aging out of the system. This wasn't hunger, this wasn't pain, this was the specific, devastating wail of a child whose world had been carved hollow by loss. The other diners were growing restless. A man in a $1,000 watch checked his Rolex with theatrical irritation. A woman in red lipstick whispered loudly to her companion about inappropriate disruptions. The restaurant's general manager, a nervous Italian man named Giuseppe, hovered near the bar, wringing his hands and shooting desperate glances toward the kitchen. Maya folded another napkin. Her section was pristine, her tables cleared and reset, but she lingered, drawn by something she couldn't name. The boy had dark hair that fell in soft waves across his forehead, and when he lifted his tear-streaked face, she caught a glimpse of eyes the colour of espresso, wide with the particular terror of a child who had learned that the people he loved could disappear without warning. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees when the front door opened. Conversations didn't just pause, they died. Silverware stopped clinking against porcelain. Even the child's sobs quieted to hiccups as every person in Benedetto's suddenly found their water glasses fascinating. Maya looked up from her perfectly folded napkins and felt her breath catch in her throat. The man who walked through the door commanded space, like gravity commanded planets. 6 feet 3 inches of controlled menace wrapped in a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than Maya's annual salary. His hair was black as midnight, styled with careful precision, and his face was carved from marble, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. But it was his eyes that made Maya's pulse stutter. Obsidian dark and absolutely unforgiving, they swept the restaurant with the calculated assessment of a predator cataloguing every possible threat. Dante Torino had arrived. The men in dark suits stood immediately, their movements synchronized with military precision. The nanny backed away from the booth as if she'd been burned, her face pale with relief and residual terror. But the boy, Enzo, took one look at his father, and began crying harder, the sound raw and desperate and utterly heartbreaking. Maya watched Dante's face change. The marble mask cracked just slightly, revealing something vulnerable underneath. He moved toward his son with careful, measured steps, as if approaching a wounded animal. When he reached the booth, he slid in beside the boy and extended one large, elegant hand toward Enzo's shoulder. "Hey, little man," Dante said, his voice surprisingly gentle despite its gravelly undertone. "Papa's here." Enzo flinched away from the touch, his small body curling into itself like a defensive shell. The rejection was swift and brutal, and Maya saw something flicker across Dante's features. Pain, confusion, the helpless frustration of a man whose power meant nothing in the face of his child's suffering. Maya's hands had stopped moving. She stood frozen beside table 12, napkin clutched in her fingers, watching the most powerful man in the city struggle with the same challenge that had defeated nannies and bodyguards and probably half a dozen child psychologists. Enzo needed something none of them could give him. He needed a mother. The thought hit her like cold water, sudden and clarifying. Maya had spent enough time in foster care to recognize the signs. She'd been that child once, inconsolable and aching for something that couldn't be bought or commanded or negotiated. She knew the specific grief of motherlessness, the way it carved out spaces inside you that no amount of expensive toys or patient explanations could fill. Giuseppe appeared at Dante's elbow, wringing his hands like prayer beads. "Mr. Torino, perhaps a private dining room would be more appropriate." Dante's gaze snapped to the manager, and Giuseppe's words died in his throat. The look lasted 3 seconds, no more, but it contained enough menace to stop a man's heart. Giuseppe backed away, hands raised in surrender, disappearing toward the kitchen with the speed of someone who understood exactly how close he'd come to making a fatal error in judgment. Maya realized she was staring. Worse, she was moving, her feet carrying her closer to the corner booth despite every instinct screaming at her to remain invisible. She was 2 tables away when one of the bodyguards noticed her approach. He was a mountain of a man, with scars across his knuckles and eyes like winter, and he shifted subtly to block her path. But Maya's attention was fixed on the child. Enzo had pressed himself into the corner of the booth, his small hands fisted in his shirt, his face red and blotchy with tears that showed no signs of stopping. The nanny hovered uselessly nearby. Dante sat rigid with barely controlled frustration. None of them understood what Maya could see so clearly. The boy wasn't crying for his father. He was crying for his mother. And until someone acknowledged that specific loss, that particular void, he would cry forever. Maya's hands were steady as she took another step forward. The bodyguard's hand moved inside his jacket, but before he could complete the motion, Dante's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Let her pass." The bodyguard froze, hand still inside his jacket, confusion flickering across his features. Maya felt the weight of Dante's attention like a physical thing, pressing against her skin. When she finally met his eyes, she saw intelligence there, sharp and calculating and utterly ruthless. He was studying her with the same intensity he might reserve for a chess opponent or a business rival. Maya took a breath that tasted like expensive wine and cheap desperation. She was about to cross a line she couldn't uncross, speak words that would change everything. But Enzo's sobs were breaking her heart, and she had never been able to walk away from a child in pain. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady despite the way her pulse hammered against her throat. "But I think I know what he needs." The silence that followed was absolute. Every conversation in the restaurant had ceased. Every server had stopped moving. Even the kitchen seemed to have gone quiet, as if the entire building was holding its breath to see what would happen next. Maya stood there in her cheap uniform, with her steady hands and her breaking heart, facing down the most dangerous man in the city, and for the first time in years she felt completely, terrifyingly visible. The attack came on a Tuesday evening when the autumn rain lashed against the mansion's bulletproof windows like accusations against glass. Maya was curled up with Enzo in the library, reading from a collection of Italian fairy tales while he traced the illustrations with careful fingers, when the security system's piercing wail shattered their peaceful moment like gunfire through silk. Enzo's body went rigid against her side, his small hands clutching the storybook with white-knuckled terror. Maya felt her own pulse spike with adrenaline, but her voice remained steady as she pulled him closer. "It's okay, sweetheart, just stay calm." Vincent appeared in the library doorway before the alarm finished its first cycle, his massive frame filling the space with barely controlled violence. His winter storm eyes swept the room with professional assessment, cataloguing threats and escape routes with mechanical precision. "Safe room, now." His voice carried the particular authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question during life-or-death situations. Maya scooped Enzo into her arms, his weight familiar and precious against her chest. Through the mansion's tall windows, she caught glimpses of dark figures moving across the landscaped grounds, their movements coordinated with military efficiency. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like deadly fireworks, and the sound of automatic weapons fire crackled through the rain-soaked air. The safe room was hidden behind a bookshelf in Dante's study, accessible through biometric scanners that recognized Maya's palm print, another sign of how completely she had been integrated into the family's security protocols. The space was larger than her old apartment, equipped with monitors that showed every angle of the mansion's exterior, communications equipment that could reach emergency services or Dante's organization, and enough supplies to survive a siege. "Papa?" Enzo whispered, his voice small with terror, as Maya settled him on the leather sofa that dominated one wall. "Your papa is handling this," Maya said with more confidence than she felt. Through the monitors, she could see Dante moving through the mansion's corridors with lethal grace, a handgun in each hand, and 3 more men flanking him with the synchronized movements of soldiers who had trained together for years. The transformation was complete and terrifying. Gone was the gentle father who had knelt to examine toy trains. Gone was the concerned single parent who worried about his son's bedtime stories. The man on the monitors moved like death itself, fluid and precise and absolutely merciless. Maya watched in horrified fascination as Dante rounded a corner and came face to face with 2 intruders dressed in black tactical gear. The confrontation lasted perhaps 3 seconds. When it ended, both attackers were on the marble floor, and Dante was checking his weapon with the casual efficiency of someone for whom violence was just another business skill. "Miss Maya," Enzo said suddenly, his voice steadier than it had been since the alarms began. "Are you scared?" Maya looked down at his face, saw the careful way he was watching her expression, and realized he was seeking reassurance from the adult who had become his emotional anchor. Her answer would shape how he processed this trauma, would determine whether he saw violence as something terrifying or as something his family could handle with competence. "I'm concerned," she said honestly, "but I'm not scared. Do you know why?" "Why?" "Because your papa is very good at protecting the people he loves, and Vincent is here to make sure nothing happens to us, and you and I are in the safest room in the house with everything we need to stay comfortable until this is over." Enzo nodded solemnly, processing her words with the gravity of a child who understood that grown-ups sometimes had to fight to keep families safe. The attack lasted 37 minutes. Maya knew this because she watched every second on the monitors, her heart hammering against her ribs as she tracked Dante's movements through his own home. She saw him coordinate with his security team through hand signals and abbreviated radio communications. She watched him check each room with systematic thoroughness, ensuring no threats remained hidden in corners or behind furniture. She saw him kill 4 men with the cold efficiency of someone for whom lethal force was a professional necessity rather than a moral crisis. When the mansion finally fell silent, except for the sound of rain against bulletproof glass, Maya felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of the world she had entered. This wasn't just wealth and privilege wrapped in Italian tailoring. This was a war zone disguised as domestic tranquility, a place where violence was always one security breach away from shattering the illusion of safety. "Is it over?" Enzo asked, his small hand finding Maya's with instinctive trust. "I think so, sweetheart." The safe room door opened 20 minutes later, revealing Dante in a fresh shirt, with his dark hair still perfectly styled, despite having just fought a small war in his own home. But Maya could see the adrenaline in his eyes, the particular alertness of someone whose nervous system was still primed for violence. "Everyone okay?" His voice was carefully controlled, but Maya caught the underlying tension that spoke to how much this attack had cost him emotionally. "We're fine," Maya said, standing with Enzo still clinging to her side. "Are you hurt?" "No." Dante moved toward them with predatory grace, and Maya realized she was seeing him as he truly was for the first time, not the concerned father or the generous employer, but the apex predator who ruled through fear and maintained power through superior firepower. He knelt beside Enzo, his hands gentle despite having held weapons minutes before. "Hey, little man, you did great. You stayed calm and listened to Maya and Vincent." "Were those bad men, Papa?" "Very bad men, but they can't hurt us anymore." "Because you stopped them?" "Because I stopped them." Enzo nodded with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a child who had always known his father was dangerous, had perhaps even drawn comfort from that danger, because it meant protection for the people he loved. "Miss Maya wasn't scared," Enzo announced proudly. "She said you're very good at protecting people." Dante's dark eyes shifted to Maya's face, and she felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. "Did she?" "She said families take care of each other, and that's what you were doing." Something flickered across Dante's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or gratitude that Maya had framed his violence in terms a 6-year-old could process without trauma. "Maya is right," he said quietly. "Families do take care of each other." As they left the safe room and walked through the mansion's corridors, Maya tried not to look at the bloodstains on the marble floors or the bullet holes in walls she had come to think of as home. But she was acutely aware of the clean-up crews already working with industrial efficiency, of the way Vincent and the other security personnel moved with the heightened alertness of soldiers who had just survived combat. Later, after Enzo had been tucked into bed with extra stories and gentle reassurances, Maya found herself alone with Dante on the balcony outside her suite. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and sharp with the scent of wet earth and gunpowder that still clung to his clothes. "Thank you," he said without preamble. "For what?" "For keeping him calm, for not falling apart when the shooting started, for explaining the violence in terms he could understand without being traumatized." Maya gripped the balcony railing with hands that were finally beginning to shake, now that the immediate danger had passed. Is this going to happen again? Probably. The honesty was brutal and somehow more comforting than false reassurance would have been. Maya appreciated being treated as someone who could handle the truth rather than someone who needed to be protected from reality. "The men who attacked tonight, they were Calabrian," Dante continued. "They've been trying to move into our territory for months. This was their attempt to send a message by targeting my family." "Your family. You and Enzo, you're both targets now, Maya. Anyone who matters to me becomes a potential weapon against me." The words settled over her like a weighted blanket, heavy with implications she was still processing. She had become not just Enzo's caregiver, but a vulnerability in Dante's armour, a person whose safety he would have to consider in every strategic decision. "I could leave," she said quietly. "Take the money you've given me and disappear. Remove the target." Dante's laugh was soft and completely without humour. "You could try." "What does that mean?" He turned to face her fully, his dark eyes reflecting the mansion's security lights like obsidian mirrors. "It means that leaving would put you in more danger, not less. The Calabrians know you matter to me now. Walking away wouldn't make you safe, it would make you an easier target. The trap was complete and perfect, Maya realized. She couldn't leave without putting herself in mortal danger, couldn't stay without accepting that violence would be a permanent feature of her existence. Dante's protection was both salvation and prison, offered with one hand while the other held the key she would never be allowed to use. "So I'm trapped," she said. "Your family," Dante corrected, stepping closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "And families protect each other, no matter what it costs." His hand came up to cup her cheek, the gesture surprisingly gentle from someone whose fingers had pulled triggers less than an hour before. Maya should have pulled away, should have maintained the professional distance that might preserve what remained of her autonomy. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, seeking comfort from the very man whose world had just tried to kill her. "Maya," he said quietly, her name sounding like a prayer in his accented voice. "I know," she whispered. "I know this is insane. I know I should be terrified. I know I should want to run. But you don't. But I don't." And as Dante's thumb traced across her cheekbone with devastating tenderness, Maya realized that she had crossed another invisible threshold. She was no longer just Enzo's caregiver or even Dante's protected asset. She was something far more dangerous and far more precious. She was becoming the woman who mattered enough to a very dangerous man that he would burn the world down to keep her safe. 6 weeks later, Maya had learned to live with the constant awareness of danger that hummed beneath the mansion's marble surfaces like electricity through hidden wires. She had memorized the security protocols, learned to recognize the subtle tension in Vincent's shoulders that meant elevated threat levels, and discovered how to comfort Enzo through nightmares that featured faceless men in tactical gear rather than missing mothers. What she hadn't learned was how to ignore the growing certainty that something was wrong with Vincent himself. It started with small things. A phone call that ended abruptly when she entered a room, Vincent checking his watch with the nervous frequency of someone with somewhere else to be, conversations with other security personnel that stopped mid-sentence when she approached. Maya had spent her childhood learning to read the subtle languages of deception, and every instinct honed in foster care was screaming warnings she couldn't quite articulate. On a Thursday morning, while Enzo practiced reading Italian with Rosa in the kitchen, Maya found herself walking past Dante's study when Vincent's voice carried through the partially open door. "The boy's schedule is predictable," he was saying, his tone carrying none of the professional deference he usually showed when discussing security matters. Swimming lessons Tuesday and Thursday, park visits on weekends when weather permits, always with the woman, always the same routes. Maya's blood turned to ice water in her veins. Vincent was discussing Enzo's movements with someone, providing the kind of detailed intelligence that could only be valuable to people planning harm. She pressed herself against the corridor wall, heart hammering as she strained to hear more. "Access to his room is possible during the 3 a.m. guard rotation," Vincent continued. "The north entrance has a 40-second gap in camera coverage, more than enough time for a professional." Maya felt bile rise in her throat. Vincent wasn't just discussing Enzo's schedule, he was planning his kidnapping. The man trusted with her family's safety was selling information to their enemies, providing blueprints for destroying everything she had come to love. "Timeline needs to be soon." Vincent's voice dropped lower, but Maya caught the urgency. "The boss is talking about taking them to the Sicily compound next month. Once they're there, access becomes impossible." Sicily. Maya remembered Dante mentioning the family's ancestral home, a fortress where his son would be surrounded by generations of loyal protection. Vincent was running out of time to deliver Enzo to whoever was paying for his betrayal. Maya backed away from the door on silent feet, her mind racing through impossible calculations. She needed proof, concrete evidence that would convince Dante his most trusted lieutenant was planning to destroy his family. But she also needed to protect Enzo immediately, and Vincent's presence in the house made every moment dangerous. The next 2 days passed in a haze of forced normalcy. Maya maintaining her usual routines while secretly documenting Vincent's suspicious behaviour. She photographed him using a secure phone she had never seen before, recorded timestamps of his unexplained absences from the mansion, and noted the way his eyes tracked Enzo's movements with predatory calculation rather than protective vigilance. But Vincent was no fool. He began watching Maya with equal intensity, and she realised with growing dread that her investigation had made her a target as well. "Miss Maya," Enzo said on Saturday morning, looking up from his breakfast with the serious expression that meant important questions were coming. "Why does Vincent look at you funny now?" The child's observation confirmed Maya's worst fears. If a 6-year-old had noticed Vincent's changed behaviour, then the danger was escalating beyond her ability to manage through careful surveillance. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "He watches you like he's waiting for something, like when Papa watches businessmen who might not keep their promises." Maya's chest tightened with terror and pride in equal measure. Enzo had inherited his father's instincts for reading dangerous people, had learned to recognise the subtle signs of threat assessment that meant survival in their world. "Has Vincent said anything to you? Asked you any questions about our routines or schedules?" Enzo nodded slowly. "Yesterday he asked what time we usually go swimming, and he wanted to know if you always walk the same way to the pool." Maya felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. Vincent was gathering final intelligence, preparing for whatever move he planned to make. The Sicily trip was scheduled for the following weekend, which meant he would act within days. That evening, after Enzo was safely asleep and the mansion had settled into its nighttime rhythm, Maya made a decision that would determine whether her family survived Vincent's betrayal. She couldn't wait for more evidence, couldn't risk Dante dismissing her suspicions as paranoia. She had to force Vincent's hand and hope she was strong enough to protect Enzo from the consequences. She found Vincent in the security office, reviewing camera feeds with the professional attention of someone whose job was protecting lives. In the monitor's blue light, he looked exactly like what he was supposed to be, a loyal soldier dedicated to the Torino family's safety. Only Maya knew that dedication was a mask hiding something infinitely more dangerous. "Vincent," she said, stepping into the office with carefully controlled confidence, "I need to talk to you about Enzo's security." His head turned toward her with mechanical precision, and Maya caught the flicker of calculation in his eyes before he arranged his features into professional courtesy. "What about it?" "I've been thinking about the swimming lessons, the route we take, the timing. It's very predictable. Maybe we should vary the schedule, use different entrances to the building." Vincent's smile was sharp as broken glass. "That's very thoughtful of you, Maya, but security protocols are my responsibility." "Of course, I just worry about Enzo's safety." "Do you?" Vincent stood slowly, his massive frame filling the small office with menace. "Or do you worry about other things? Things that might disrupt very carefully laid plans?" The pretense was gone now, dropped like a mask that had outlived its usefulness. Maya found herself facing a man whose loyalty had been purchased by enemies willing to pay more than Dante ever could. "I don't know what you mean," she said carefully. "You know exactly what I mean. You've been watching me, taking pictures, documenting my movements like some amateur detective playing at being important." Maya's pulse hammered against her throat, but she held Vincent's gaze steadily. "I've been trying to protect this family." "This family?" Vincent's laugh was ugly and without humour. "You think you're family? You think Dante sees you as anything more than convenient pussy with maternal instincts?" The crude words were designed to wound, to make her doubt her place in Dante's world. But Maya had survived worse attacks on her worth, had learned long ago that other people's cruelty said more about them than about her. "I know Enzo loves me," she said quietly, "and I know I would die before letting anyone hurt him." "How touching! Unfortunately, you won't have to die. You'll just have to watch." Vincent moved toward her with predatory grace, and Maya realised with crystalline clarity that her investigation had forced his timeline forward. Whatever he planned to do to Enzo, it would happen tonight. The Calabrians are paying very well for access to Dante's son, Vincent continued conversationally. Enough to disappear permanently, start over somewhere Dante's reach can't touch me. All I need is a 40-second window during the guard rotation. Dante trusted you, Maya said, backing toward the door while keeping her voice steady. You ate at his table, played with his son, lived in his house. Dante pays well, but the Calabrians pay better, and they don't expect loyalty to dead wives and crying children. The dismissive way he spoke about Enzo's grief ignited something dangerous in Maya's chest. This man had watched a bereaved child struggle through the worst period of his life, had witnessed Dante's desperate love for his son, had been trusted with protecting everything the Torino family held precious, and he had sold it all for money. Maya's hand found the security alarm panel behind her, her fingers moving across the buttons with muscle memory learned through weeks of safety drills. The mansion's emergency alert system activated with piercing intensity, and Vincent's eyes went wide with furious understanding. "You stupid bitch!" He lunged toward her with lethal intent, but Maya was already moving, racing through corridors she knew by heart toward Enzo's room and the child who had become more precious to her than her own life. Behind her, Vincent's footsteps pounded against marble with the relentless rhythm of pursuit that could only end in violence. But Maya had bought them time. Precious seconds for Dante's security protocols to activate, for help to arrive, for the man who ruled through controlled violence to discover that the greatest threat to his family had been sleeping under his own roof. All she had to do now was reach Enzo before Vincent reached them both, and hope that love was stronger than betrayal, that protection was faster than revenge, that the family she had chosen was worth dying for. Because in the world of Dante Torino, loyalty was the rarest currency of all, and Maya was about to discover exactly how much hers was worth. Maya reached Enzo's room 3 seconds before Vincent's massive frame filled the doorway behind her, his face twisted with the particular fury of someone whose carefully laid plans had been destroyed by an inconvenient witness. The security alarm's piercing wail echoed through the mansion's marble corridors like a war cry, and Maya could hear the thunder of approaching footsteps as Dante's response team mobilized with military precision. But 3 seconds might as well have been 3 hours when a child's life hung in the balance. Enzo sat up in his bed, dark hair tousled with sleep and eyes wide with confusion, as he processed the chaos erupting around him. "Miss Maya, what's happening?" "Stay behind me, sweetheart," Maya said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. She positioned herself between the bed and Vincent's advancing bulk, her hands empty, but her stance protective in the way that only maternal instinct could achieve. Vincent pulled a knife from somewhere inside his jacket, a wicked thing with a serrated edge that caught the room's nightlight and threw back promises of violence. Maya had never seen anything more terrifying in her life, but she didn't move from her position guarding Enzo. "This doesn't have to involve the boy," Vincent said, his voice carrying false reasonableness over underlying menace. "Step aside, Maya. Let me finish what I came here to do, and he won't get hurt." "The hell I will." Maya's response surprised them both with its venom. She had spent her life avoiding confrontation, perfecting invisibility, choosing flight over fight in every dangerous situation. But watching Vincent advance on the child who had claimed her heart with such complete trust, Maya discovered reserves of courage she hadn't known existed. "He's just a little boy," she said fiercely. "He's done nothing to deserve whatever the Calabrians are paying you to do." "The Calabrians want him alive," Vincent said, stepping closer with predatory patience. "They need leverage over Dante, not a corpse, but you're expendable." The knife swept toward Maya's throat with lethal precision, but 18 months of caring for an active 6-year-old had honed reflexes she didn't know she possessed. She dropped to her knees and rolled sideways, Vincent's blade whistling through air where her neck had been moments before. "Enzo, run!" Maya gasped, scrambling toward the nightstand where she remembered seeing Rosa arrange fresh flowers that morning. Her fingers closed around the heavy crystal vase, and she swung it with desperate strength at Vincent's approaching form. The improvised weapon connected with his temple in a spray of water and shattered glass, and Vincent staggered backward with a roar of pain and fury. Blood flowed from the gash Maya had opened, but he remained upright and infinitely dangerous. "You stupid bitch!" Vincent's curse was cut short by the sound that Maya had been praying for, the distinctive crack of Dante's voice cutting through the alarm's wail like a blade through silk. "Vincent!" Maya had never heard such concentrated menace in a human voice. Dante stood in the doorway with a handgun in each hand, his face transformed into something carved from obsidian and pure rage. Behind him, she could see Rosa clutching Enzo protectively, the child's face pale but unharmed. "Step away from her," Dante said, his words carrying the particular quiet that preceded volcanic eruptions. "Now." Vincent's laugh was ugly and desperate. "Or what? You'll shoot me in your son's bedroom? Risk a stray bullet finding little Enzo?" It was a reasonable calculation from a man trained in tactics and psychological warfare. Children's bedrooms weren't ideal locations for gunfights, and Dante's love for his son was legendary enough to be considered an exploitable weakness. Vincent had forgotten that Maya Chen had spent her childhood learning to survive in situations where adults held all the power and none of the mercy. While Vincent's attention focused on the deadly threat posed by Dante's weapons, Maya drove the jagged remains of the crystal vase into his thigh with every ounce of strength desperation could provide. Vincent's scream of pain and surprise echoed off the bedroom walls, and his knife clattered to the floor as he stumbled forward. Dante moved with fluid precision, one gun trained on Vincent while the other swept the room for additional threats. "Maya, get away from him!" But Maya was already moving, scooping up Vincent's dropped knife and placing herself once again between potential danger and the child who had become her world. Her hands shook with adrenaline and residual terror, but her grip on the weapon remained steady. "He was selling information to the Calabrians," she said breathlessly. "Enzo's schedule, security rotations, access points to the house. He was planning to take him tonight." Dante's eyes never left Vincent, but Maya saw something shift in his expression, a recognition that went beyond betrayal to something approaching personal devastation. Vincent had been more than an employee. He had been trusted with the two most precious things in Dante's world. "Is this true?" Dante asked quietly. Vincent's response was a snarl of defiance and pain. "Your son is worth more to them alive than your loyalty is to me." "I see." The two words contained enough menace to stop a human heart. Maya watched Dante's face transform from controlled anger to something far more dangerous, the cold calculation of someone deciding exactly how much suffering a betrayal warranted. "Maya," Dante said without looking at her, "take Enzo to your room, lock the door, don't open it until I come for you personally." "Dante, go, now!" The authority in his voice brooked no argument. Maya dropped the knife and moved toward Rosa, who transferred Enzo into her arms with the efficiency of someone accustomed to evacuating children from dangerous situations. "Miss Maya?" Enzo whispered against her shoulder as she carried him from the room. "Is Papa going to hurt Vincent?" Maya glanced back to see Dante advancing on his wounded, betrayed lieutenant with the patient stalking gait of a predator who had all night to enjoy his kill. "Your Papa is going to make sure Vincent can never hurt our family again," she said quietly. They waited in Maya's suite for 47 minutes. Maya knew this because she counted every second while holding Enzo against her chest, listening to the occasional sound that drifted up from the mansion's lower levels and trying not to imagine what was happening in rooms she couldn't see. When Dante finally knocked on her door, his voice was perfectly calm. "It's finished." Maya opened the door to find him standing in the corridor, his clothes immaculate despite whatever had transpired with Vincent. His hands were clean, his hair perfectly styled. his expression carrying the satisfied stillness of someone who had resolved a problem permanently. "Where is he?" Maya asked. "Gone. He won't be troubling anyone again." The euphemism was clear enough. Maya felt she should be horrified by the casual way Dante discussed murder, should be traumatized by her proximity to such violence. Instead, she felt only relief that the threat to Enzo had been eliminated with surgical precision. "And the Calabrians will receive a message about what happens to people who threaten my family," Dante said, his voice carrying promises of retribution that made Maya's skin prickle. Vincent was their inside source. Without him, they're blind. 6 months later, Maya stood in the same corner booth at Benedetto's where everything had begun, watching Enzo colour elaborate train designs on paper placemats while Dante reviewed business documents with the casual efficiency of someone whose empire ran smoothly enough to allow family dinners. The transformation was complete and profound. Maya wore a ring now, 3 carats of flawless diamond that caught the restaurant's crystal light and threw back promises of permanent belonging. Her clothes were designer, her posture confident, her place in the world absolutely secure. But it was Enzo's transformation that took her breath away. The hollow-eyed, inconsolable child she had met 8 months ago had been replaced by a bright, chattering boy who approached each day with curiosity rather than grief. He still missed his mother, would always miss her, but that loss no longer defined his existence. "Miss Maya," he said suddenly, looking up from his artistic endeavours, "remember when I used to cry all the time?" "I remember." "Why don't I cry like that anymore?" Maya glanced at Dante, who was watching their conversation with the focused attention he always gave to discussions of his son's emotional development. "Because you learned that missing someone doesn't mean you have to be sad all the time," Maya said gently. "Your mama wouldn't want you to spend your whole life crying. She would want you to be happy and healthy and loved." "And I am," Enzo said matter-of-factly. "I have Papa and I have you, and I have Nonna Eleanor and Rosa and all the people who take care of us." "Yes, you do. And next month we're going to marry you properly, so you'll be my real mama instead of just my second mama." Maya felt her chest tighten with dangerous warmth. The wedding was Enzo's idea, supported enthusiastically by a grandmother who had taken to Dante with the shameless favouritism of someone who appreciated men who solved problems efficiently. Maya had agreed not because Dante demanded it, but because the alternative, leaving this strange, dangerous, beautiful family, had become literally unthinkable. "Are you happy about that?" she asked. Enzo's answering smile could have powered the restaurant's electrical grid. "I'm the happiest boy in the whole world," he announced, with the complete confidence of someone whose assessment had been thoroughly tested and verified. As if summoned by his son's declaration, another child at a nearby table began crying with the particular intensity that spoke of genuine distress rather than theatrical demands for attention. Maya's head turned automatically toward the sound, her maternal instincts still perfectly calibrated to recognize when little ones needed help. But this time she didn't move from her seat. This time she watched with satisfaction as another woman, a server who had clearly learned from Maya's example, approached the crying child with gentle competence and genuine concern. "The waitress knows what to do," Enzo observed, following her gaze. "Just like you did." "Just like I did," Maya agreed. Dante's hand found hers across the white tablecloth, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that was both possessive and protective. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. Maya looked around the restaurant where her old life had ended and her new one had begun, at the child who had claimed her heart and the dangerous man who had made her essential, at the ring on her finger that symbolized belonging beyond anything she had ever imagined possible. "Not a single one," she said honestly. And as Dante's smile turned predatory with satisfaction and Enzo launched into an animated description of the wedding cake designs he had been studying with Rosa, Maya Chen realized that sometimes salvation came disguised as beautiful, terrifying captivity. The waitress was gone. Long live the queen. The air between them crackled with electricity so thick Maya could taste it on her tongue. Dante Torino's obsidian eyes locked onto hers with the intensity of a laser sight, and for a moment that stretched like eternity, the entire restaurant held its breath. His security team had shifted into defensive positions, hands hovering near concealed weapons, but their boss hadn't moved a muscle. He sat perfectly still beside his sobbing son, studying Maya with the calculated patience of a predator, deciding whether she was prey or threat. "You think you know what my son needs?" His voice was whiskey over broken glass, soft enough to be intimate, but carrying an undertone that could freeze blood. The Italian accent was subtle but unmistakable, rolling through his consonants like velvet wrapped around steel. Maya's hands remained steady at her sides, even as every survival instinct screamed at her to apologize, to back away, to disappear into the kitchen and never emerge. But Enzo's hiccuping sobs pulled at something deep in her chest, a recognition that transcended self-preservation. "I think he's not crying for you," she said quietly, her voice carrying just far enough to reach Dante's ears. "He's crying for his mother." The words hung in the air like smoke. Dante's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a muscle jumping beneath his olive skin. Around them, the restaurant's atmosphere shifted from curious tension to something far more dangerous. Maya had just spoken the unspeakable, named the wound that money and power couldn't heal. One of the bodyguards, a man built like a concrete wall with eyes like winter storms, took a half-step forward. Maya caught the movement in her peripheral vision, but kept her gaze fixed on Dante's face. She watched recognition flicker across his features, followed quickly by something that might have been pain if she didn't know better than to attribute human emotions to men who commanded empires built on fear. And what?" Dante said, his voice dropping another octave. "Makes a waitress think she understands my family better than trained professionals?" Maya glanced at the nanny, who had pressed herself against the wall as if she could disappear into the burgundy wallpaper. The woman's face was flushed with embarrassment and relief that someone else was drawing Dante's attention, that the failure was no longer entirely hers to bear. "Because I've been him," Maya said simply. "I know what it sounds like when a child cries for someone who can't come back." The admission cost her something. Maya had spent years perfecting the art of invisibility, of revealing nothing that could be used against her. But watching Enzo's small shoulders shake with grief that his father's money couldn't touch, she found herself speaking truths she'd buried so deep she'd almost convinced herself they weren't real. Dante's eyes narrowed, and Maya felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing pressing against her skin. He was cataloguing everything: her posture, her breathing, the way she held herself steady despite facing down the most dangerous man in 3 states. She realized he was conducting an assessment, measuring her against some internal standard she couldn't begin to guess. "Vincent," Dante said, without taking his eyes off Maya. The concrete wall of a bodyguard stepped forward slightly. Background check. Full workup. "Boss, we're in public. Now." The single word carried enough menace to stop a freight train. Vincent pulled out his phone and stepped away, already dialing numbers that would unlock every secret Maya had ever tried to keep buried. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She'd known this moment would come eventually, the moment her careful invisibility shattered and powerful people started asking questions she couldn't afford to answer. But Enzo's sobs were quieter now, and she could see him watching her through tears with something that looked almost like hope. "Maya Chen," Vincent said quietly, reading from his phone screen. 28 years old, born in San Francisco. Parents died in car accident when she was 7. Bounced through 6 foster homes before aging out of the system at 18. Maya's hands clenched into fists, but her expression remained steady. She'd known they would find the basics quickly. The deeper secrets would take longer to unearth. Currently employed here and at Romano's Coffee on 5th Street, Vincent continued. Lives alone in a studio apartment on Bleecker. Grandmother hospitalised at Mercy General with late-stage lung cancer. No siblings, no criminal record, no known associations with organised crime. No children of her own, Dante observed, his gaze never leaving Maya's face. No, sir. Maya lifted her chin slightly. Not everyone needs to give birth to understand what a child requires. Something shifted in Dante's expression, a subtle softening around his eyes that lasted perhaps 2 seconds before the mask slammed back into place. He looked down at Enzo, who had stopped crying entirely and was now watching the adults with the wide-eyed fascination of a child, sensing that something important was happening. "Enzo," Dante said gently, his voice transforming from glass and steel to something approaching warmth. "This is Miss Maya. She thinks she might be able to help you feel better." The boy's dark eyes fixed on Maya's face with an intensity that reminded her painfully of his father. But where Dante's gaze was calculating and dangerous, Enzo's held only raw need and desperate hope. Maya knelt slowly beside the booth, bringing herself to the child's eye level. The movement put her dangerously close to Dante's sphere of influence, close enough to catch the scent of expensive cologne and something darker underneath. Gunpowder, perhaps, or the metallic tang of violence barely contained. "Hello, Enzo," she said softly, her voice carrying the particular gentle cadence she'd learned from the one good foster mother she'd known. "You have very sad eyes. Do you want to tell me what's making you so unhappy?" Enzo looked at his father, then back at Maya. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I miss Mama." The words hit the table like a physical blow. Maya saw Dante's hands clench on the white tablecloth, saw the nanny's face crumple with helpless sympathy. Around them, the restaurant continued its careful pantomime of normal service, but Maya could feel the weight of attention from every table. "I know you do," Maya said, her voice steady despite the way her heart cracked in her chest. "Missing someone who loved you very much is the hardest thing in the whole world. It feels like there's a hole inside you that nothing can fill." Enzo nodded, tears spilling fresh down his cheeks, but these weren't the desperate, inconsolable sobs from before. These were the tears of recognition, of finally being understood. "But you know what?" Maya continued, reaching slowly toward a clean napkin. "Your mama would want you to eat dinner. She would want you to be strong and healthy and happy. And maybe, when you're ready, she would want you to let other people help take care of you." She dabbed gently at his tears, and Enzo didn't pull away. If anything, he leaned slightly into the touch, starving for the kind of gentle comfort his bodyguards couldn't provide. Maya was acutely aware of Dante, watching every movement, cataloguing every response. She could feel the dangerous electricity of his attention, the way he seemed to be measuring something she couldn't name. But Enzo was breathing normally now, his small body finally relaxed against the booth's leather cushions. "Are you hungry?" Maya asked. "Your papa ordered you the gnocchi. It's my favourite too." Enzo nodded shyly. Maya glanced at Dante, a silent request for permission. He gave an almost imperceptible nod, and Maya slid into the booth beside the child, carefully maintaining distance from Dante while positioning herself close enough to provide the maternal comfort Enzo craved. The shift in atmosphere was immediate and profound. Enzo picked up his fork with steady hands and took a small bite of the untouched pasta. Around them, conversations gradually resumed as the crisis passed. But Maya could feel undercurrents of tension that had nothing to do with a crying child, and everything to do with the way Dante Torino was watching her with the focused intensity of a man who had just discovered something he needed. And in the world of Dante Torino, what he needed, he took. Maya watched Enzo take another careful bite of gnocchi, his small fingers wrapped around the fork with newfound steadiness. The transformation was remarkable. Where minutes before there had been inconsolable grief, now there was quiet concentration as he navigated the delicate pasta with the precision of a child determined to prove his good manners. Every few seconds, his dark eyes would dart to Maya's face, seeking reassurance, and she would offer him a gentle smile that seemed to settle something deep in his chest. The memory hit her without warning, sharp as broken glass. Maya at age 8, sitting in the sterile cafeteria of St. Catherine's Home for Children, surrounded by other forgotten souls, picking at institutional meatloaf while social workers discussed their futures in clinical terms. She remembered the ache in her chest, the way she would scan every woman who walked through those doors, hoping against hope that one of them might see something worth loving in a skinny girl with 2 quiet eyes and hands that shook when adults raised their voices. Maya blinked away the flashback, focusing on Enzo's face. She recognized the signs with painful clarity, the way he held himself too still, as if sudden movements might shatter this fragile moment of peace. The careful politeness that came from learning early that good behaviour might earn affection. The desperate hunger for maternal attention that radiated from him like heat from a fever. "Is it good?" she asked softly, nodding toward his plate. Enzo nodded solemnly. "Mama used to make gnocchi on Sundays. She said the secret was to make them light as clouds." "Your mama sounds like she was a wonderful cook." Maya's voice carried genuine warmth, none of the forced cheer that adults often used when discussing dead parents with grieving children. "What else did she like to make?" "Osso buco," Enzo said, his pronunciation careful and precise. "And tiramisu for special occasions. She would let me help measure the mascarpone." Across the table, Dante sat motionless as marble, but Maya caught the slight tightening around his eyes at his son's words. Pain, she realized, raw and carefully controlled, but unmistakable to someone who had learned to read the subtle languages of grief. Maya's shift supervisor appeared at the edge of her vision, a thin man named Marcus, whose nervous energy had only intensified since the arrival of Dante's entourage. He hovered just outside the invisible boundary of the bodyguard's protective circle, wringing his hands and shooting increasingly desperate glances in her direction. "Maya," Marcus whispered, his voice pitched low but carrying enough urgency to make several heads turn. "Your other tables!" Vincent, the concrete wall of a bodyguard, turned his winter storm eyes on Marcus with the lazy interest of a predator spotting wounded prey. The supervisor's words died in his throat, colour draining from his face as he realised he had just interrupted a moment that Dante Torino was clearly invested in protecting. "The lady is busy," Vincent said, his voice carrying the particular quiet menace of someone who had ended conversations permanently. "Find someone else." Marcus retreated so quickly he nearly tripped over his own feet, disappearing toward the kitchen with the speed of someone who understood exactly how close he had come to making a fatal error in judgment. Maya felt the shift in atmosphere, the way Dante's power extended to create a protective bubble around their table. She should have been terrified. This level of casual intimidation spoke to a kind of influence that normal people only glimpsed in movies. Instead, she found herself oddly grateful. For the first time in months, someone was ensuring she wouldn't be interrupted while doing something that mattered. "You're not afraid of me," Dante observed, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. It wasn't a question. Maya met his gaze steadily. "Should I be?" "Most people are." "Most people haven't spent their childhood learning to read dangerous men." The words slipped out before Maya could stop them, revealing more than she had intended. She saw interest flicker in Dante's dark eyes, the sharp focus of someone who had just heard something intriguing. "Foster care," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Vincent's background check had clearly been thorough. 6 homes in 11 years, Maya confirmed, her voice steady despite the way her stomach clenched at the admission. "You learn quickly which adults keep their promises and which ones have other intentions. You learn to spot the difference between protection and control." Enzo had stopped eating, his dark eyes moving between the adults with the acute awareness of a child accustomed to reading emotional undercurrents. Maya realized they were discussing territory that might frighten him, and she smoothly redirected her attention back to his plate. "Tell me about your favorite toy," she said, her tone shifting to the gentle warmth reserved for children. "Do you have something special at home?" Enzo's face brightened slightly. "I have a train set. It's electric with real smoke. Papa bought it from Germany." "That sounds amazing. Do you build different tracks?" "Sometimes, but it's more fun when—" His voice trailed off, sadness creeping back into his expression. "When your mama helped you," Maya finished gently. Enzo nodded, tears threatening again. But before the grief could overwhelm him, Maya reached across the table and placed her hand gently over his small fingers. "You know what I think?" she said conspiratorially, lowering her voice as if sharing a precious secret. "I think your mama would want you to keep playing with that train set, and maybe when you're building tracks you could tell her about them, just like she's still there, watching you create something beautiful." The effect was immediate and profound. Enzo's tears didn't fall, but his breathing steadied, and something like wonder crept into his dark eyes. "Do you think she can hear me?" he whispered. "I think the people who love us never really leave," Maya said honestly. "They become part of us, helping us remember how to be brave and kind and strong." Dante was watching this exchange with an intensity that made Maya's skin prickle. She could feel his attention like a physical weight, cataloguing every word, every gesture, every subtle shift in his son's demeanour. She was performing, she realised, not artificially, but in the way that all meaningful human connection required a kind of performance. She was showing him what his son needed, demonstrating a competency that couldn't be bought or commanded. The restaurant around them had gradually returned to its normal rhythm. Conversations resumed at other tables, servers moved efficiently between the kitchen and dining room, and the soft clink of expensive china provided a civilized soundtrack to the evening's drama. But Maya remained acutely aware that she was being evaluated by a man whose judgment could reshape her entire existence. "Miss Maya," Enzo said suddenly, his voice stronger than it had been all evening, "will you tell me more about the people who love us? How do they help us remember?" Maya smiled, genuinely touched by his earnest curiosity. As she began to explain the ways that love transcended physical presence, she caught Dante's reflection in the restaurant's mirrored wall. His expression had shifted from calculating assessment to something far more dangerous: recognition. He was looking at her the way a chess master looked at a perfectly positioned queen, powerful and essential and absolutely necessary to win the game. Maya Chen had spent her entire adult life perfecting the art of invisibility, of being overlooked and underestimated and forgotten. But sitting in this corner booth, comforting a grieving child while his father planned her future with predatory precision, she realized that her days of hiding were coming to an end. And terrifyingly, she wasn't entirely sure she wanted them to continue. The silence that followed Maya's gentle explanation about love transcending death stretched like a taut wire through the restaurant's opulent air. Enzo had finished most of his gnocchi, his small face calmer than it had been all evening, but Maya could feel the weight of unfinished business pressing against her shoulders. She had crossed an invisible line by approaching this table, by speaking truths that money couldn't buy, and now she found herself in territory where every word could reshape her future. Dante's fingers drummed once against the white tablecloth, a barely perceptible movement that somehow conveyed more menace than Vincent's hand hovering near his concealed weapon. Maya's pulse hammered against her throat, but her hands remained steady as she helped Enzo wipe marinara sauce from his chin with the practiced care of someone who understood that children needed gentle tending even in the midst of adult complications. "Miss Maya," Dante said finally, his voice carrying the particular quiet intensity of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. A word. It wasn't a request. Maya felt the temperature drop another 10 degrees as Dante's dark eyes fixed on hers with laser focus. She glanced at Enzo, who was now colouring on the paper placemat with crayons the nanny had produced from an expensive handbag. his concentration absolute in the way that only children could achieve. "Of course," Maya said, her voice steady despite the way her stomach clenched with anticipation. She had known this moment was coming, the reckoning, the demand for explanation she wasn't sure she could provide. Dante stood in one fluid motion, his movements carrying the controlled grace of a predator who had never learned to doubt his own power. He was taller than she had realized, his presence filling space with an authority that made other diners instinctively look away. When he gestured toward the restaurant's private alcove near the wine cellar, Maya felt as if she were being invited to her own execution. "Vincent," Dante said without turning around, "watch Enzo." The concrete wall of a bodyguard nodded once and moved to position himself with clear sight lines to both the child's table and the alcove, where his boss was leading a waitress who had somehow managed to accomplish what trained professionals could not. Maya followed Dante through the dining room, acutely aware of the curious glances and whispered conversations that track their movement. Giuseppe, the restaurant manager, hovered near the bar with the nervous energy of someone whose establishment was hosting a conversation that could end in violence or vast amounts of money changing hands, possibly both. The alcove was intimate and dimly lit, with burgundy leather banquettes and oil paintings of the Italian countryside that probably cost more than Maya's annual rent. Dante gestured for her to sit, but remained standing himself, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the carefully controlled power in his frame. "You think you understand my son," he said without preamble, his accent adding weight to each word. Maya met his gaze directly. "I think he's a 6-year-old boy who misses his mother and doesn't understand why the adults around him can't acknowledge that grief." "And what makes you qualified to make such assessments?" "Foster care teaches you things," Maya said quietly. "You learn to read the difference between adults who see children as people and adults who see them as problems to be solved. Your son isn't a problem, Mr. Torino. He's a little boy who needs someone to understand that missing his mother isn't something to be fixed. It's something to be honoured." Dante's eyes narrowed slightly, and Maya caught a flicker of something that might have been surprise. He was clearly accustomed to people telling him what they thought he wanted to hear, not uncomfortable truths delivered without apology. "You have no children of your own," he observed. "No. No husband, no boyfriend." Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her expression neutral. Vincent's background check was thorough. "Vincent's background check was preliminary," Dante corrected, and there was something in his tone that made Maya's skin prickle with unease. "Tell me about the last foster home, the one you ran away from 3 times. The words hit Maya like cold water, and for the first time since approaching his table, her composure cracked slightly. That information wasn't in public records. Someone had done serious digging to unearth those particular details, had spoken to social workers who were supposed to maintain confidentiality, had uncovered secrets she thought were buried forever. "That's not relevant to your son's situation," she said carefully. "Everything is relevant when it concerns my son's well-being." Dante's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but the menace in it could have frozen blood. "The Hendersons! Foster parents who took in teenage girls and had very specific ideas about gratitude." Maya's hands clenched in her lap, but she held Dante's gaze steady. "I was 16. They were predators. I protected myself by running away 3 times until Child Services finally listened. Until Child Services finally cared enough to investigate." The bitterness in Maya's voice surprised even her. She had spent years burying that particular rage, transforming it into the quiet competence that kept her invisible and safe. Dante studied her face with the intensity of a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. "You fought back," he said, and there was something in his tone that sounded almost like approval. "Ah, I survived. You protected yourself when the system failed you." Dante moved closer, his presence filling the alcove's intimate space. And now you see my son struggling with grief that the adults around him are too uncomfortable to address directly, and your instinct is to protect him too." It wasn't a question, but Maya nodded anyway. The truth of it was written in every gentle word she had spoken to Enzo, every careful touch, every moment of maternal warmth she had offered a child starving for exactly that kind of attention. "Why?" Dante asked. The question was simple, but Maya understood that her answer would determine everything that happened next. She could deflect, could offer the safe response about all children deserving compassion. Instead, she chose honesty with a man who commanded empires built on lies and violence. "Because I know what it feels like to need someone who understands," she said quietly, "and I know what it costs when nobody does." Dante was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face for deception and finding none. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note she hadn't heard before, something that might have been vulnerability if she didn't know better than to attribute human weakness to men who ruled through fear. "Enzo's mother died in a car accident 18 months ago," he said. "Drunk driver ran a red light. She was coming home from his school play." Maya felt her chest tighten with sympathetic pain. "I'm sorry." "Since then he cries at least once a day, usually more. We've tried everything. Child psychologists, grief counsellors, behavioural specialists. Nothing works. He sleeps in my bed because nightmares wake him screaming for her." The admission cost him something. Maya could see it in the slight tension around his eyes, the way his hands clenched behind his back. This was a man unaccustomed to acknowledging failure, especially failures that money and influence couldn't correct. Tonight was the first time in 18 months he stopped crying because someone understood what he needed, Dante continued. Not medication, not distraction, not behavioural modification, understanding. Maya nodded slowly, beginning to see the shape of what was coming. "I want to hire you," he said simply. The words hung in the alcove's perfumed air like smoke from an expensive cigar. Maya felt her world tilt slightly on its axis as she processed the implications of such an offer from such a man. "To do what exactly?" she asked, though she was afraid she already knew. "To give my son what he needs, to be what he's missing." "Mr. Torino?" "Dante," he corrected, stepping closer until she could smell his cologne, expensive and dark with undertones of something that might have been danger itself. "And before you refuse, consider this. Your grandmother's medical bills currently total just over $200,000. The experimental treatment her oncologist mentioned, not covered by insurance. The rent on your studio apartment is 4 months behind." Maya's blood turned to ice water in her veins. The level of detail, the casual way he recited her most desperate secrets, spoke to surveillance that went far beyond a simple background check. "You've been watching me," she whispered. "I've been learning about you," Dante corrected, "and what I've learned is that you're drowning in circumstances beyond your control while possessing exactly what my son needs to heal." He reached into his jacket, a movement that would have had Vincent drawing his weapon if anyone else had attempted it, and withdrew an envelope of heavy cream paper. "Consider this a preview," he said, placing it on the table between them. Maya stared at the envelope as if it might contain a live snake. "I haven't agreed to anything. Look inside." Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope and saw the check within. The number of zeros made her vision blur slightly. It was more money than she had ever seen at once, enough to pay her grandmother's medical bills and her rent, and still have more left over than she could earn in 2 years of double shifts. "This is what I'm offering for 1 month of your time," Dante said quietly. "Help my son sleep through the night. Help him remember how to smile without crying afterward. Give him the maternal care that no amount of money can buy." Maya looked up from the check to find Dante's obsidian eyes fixed on her face with predatory intensity. "And if I refuse?" "Then you refuse," he said simply. "You walk away, return to your tables, and we never speak again. Your grandmother receives the treatment she needs regardless, Call it gratitude for tonight." The offer was too generous, too easy, too perfect to be entirely honest. Maya had learned long ago that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually concealed teeth sharp enough to draw blood. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked. Dante's smile was sharp as broken glass and twice as dangerous. "That once you see how much my son needs you, you'll never want to leave. And Maya?" He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to bypass her ears and speak directly to something primal in her chest. "In my world, people who become necessary tend to stay that way, permanently." The threat was velvet-wrapped but unmistakable. Maya sat frozen in the burgundy leather banquette, holding a check that could save her life while staring into the eyes of a man who might end it just as easily. And despite every survival instinct screaming warnings in her head, she found herself thinking about Enzo's tear-stained face and wondering if salvation was always supposed to feel quite so much like walking willingly into beautiful, terrifying captivity. Maya stared at the check until the numbers blurred together, her mind racing through calculations that felt surreal. $200,000. More money than her grandmother's medical bills, more than her rent arrears, more than she had ever imagined holding in her hands. The paper felt substantial between her fingers, embossed with the letterhead of a private bank she'd only heard mentioned in whispered conversations about the kind of wealth that moved mountains and buried secrets. "You think you can succeed where others have failed?" Dante's question from earlier echoed in her mind, but now it carried different weight. This wasn't just about comforting a crying child anymore. This was about stepping into a world where failure might mean more than losing a job. It might mean losing everything. She looked up to find Dante watching her with the patient stillness of a predator who knew his prey was already caught. The alcove's dim lighting cast shadows across his angular features, making him appear more dangerous than any man had a right to look in a civilized restaurant. "You're asking me to raise your son," she said quietly. "I'm asking you to give him what he needs to heal." "And what happens when he's healed? When he doesn't need me anymore?" Dante's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "That assumes healing has an end point. Enzo lost his mother, Maya. That wound will never fully close. He'll always need someone who understands that particular kind of grief." The words settled over her like a weighted blanket, comforting and suffocating in equal measure. Maya had spent her adult life perfecting the art of temporary connections, of caring for people just enough to help, but never enough to become indispensable. Indispensable people, in her experience, became prisoners of their own competence. "I want to see him again," she said suddenly, "before I decide anything." Dante's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why?" "Because if I'm going to dedicate my life to helping your son, I need to be sure I can actually help him. Not just calm him down for one evening, but give him what he needs to sleep through the night and wake up believing tomorrow might be better than today." The honesty in her voice seemed to catch Dante off guard. His expression shifted from calculating assessment to something approaching respect. "Vincent!" he called softly. The bodyguard appeared at the alcove's entrance with the silent speed of someone trained in violence. "Boss? Bring Enzo here, carefully." Vincent nodded and disappeared. Maya felt her pulse quicken as she realized she was about to be tested in a way that would determine not just Enzo's future, but her own. If she failed, if the child's brief calm had been a fluke rather than genuine connection, she would walk away with enough money to save her grandmother, but without the terrifying security of knowing her place in Dante's world. Enzo appeared at Vincent's side, his small hand dwarfed by the bodyguard's massive palm. He looked uncertain, his dark eyes darting between his father and Maya with the wariness of a child accustomed to adult conversations that ended in disappointment. "Papa?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Come here, little man." Dante's voice transformed instantly, becoming gentle in a way that revealed depths Maya hadn't suspected. "Miss Maya wants to talk to you." Enzo approached slowly, and Maya felt her heart crack at the careful way he moved, like someone who had learned that hope was dangerous, that attachment led to loss, that the safest position was always one step away from caring too much. She knelt again, bringing herself to his eye level in the alcove's intimate space. This close, she could see the exhaustion in his young features, the way grief had carved premature shadows beneath his eyes. "Hi, sweetheart," she said softly. "I have a very important question to ask you, and I need you to tell me the truth. Can you do that?" Enzo nodded solemnly. Sometimes, when people we love go away, we need help remembering how to be happy again, not forgetting the people we miss, but learning how to smile even when we're sad. Do you think you might want that kind of help? Enzo's lower lip trembled slightly. Mama said I should always try to be brave. Your mama was very smart, and you know what brave people do. They ask for help when they need it. They let other people care for them. Like how you cared for me at dinner. Maya's throat tightened, exactly like that. Would you like me to care for you more, to help you when you're sad, and play with you when you're happy, and maybe teach you some of the things mamas teach their little boys? The silence that followed stretched for an eternity. Maya could feel Dante's attention like a laser beam, could sense Vincent's presence in her peripheral vision, could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Everything. Her grandmother's treatment, her future, her ability to help this broken child, hung on Enzo's response. "Would you read me stories?" he asked finally, his voice small but hopeful. "Every night if you want." "Would you make pancakes? Mama used to make pancakes on Saturday mornings." "I would love to learn how your mama made them. Maybe you could help me, and we could make them together." Enzo's face brightened slightly, the first genuine spark of interest she had seen from him all evening. "Could we make them shaped like animals? Mama made elephant pancakes once." Maya laughed, a sound of pure delight that seemed to surprise everyone in the alcove. "Elephant pancakes sound amazing. We could make a whole zoo of pancakes." "And read stories after?" "And read stories after." Enzo looked at his father, some silent communication passing between them that Maya couldn't interpret. When he turned back to her, his expression was grave in the way that only children could manage. "Miss Maya, if you come live with us, will you promise not to go away?" The question hit Maya like a physical blow. This child, who had already lost the most important person in his world, was asking for the one guarantee she wasn't sure she could give. She glanced at Dante, saw something that might have been warning in his dark eyes, and realized she was at the crossroads that would define the rest of her life. "Enzo," she said carefully, "sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult choices, but I promise you this, if I come live with you, I will never leave without saying goodbye. And I will never leave unless I'm absolutely sure you're safe and loved and taken care of." It wasn't the promise he wanted, but it was honest, and something in her tone seemed to satisfy him. He nodded slowly, then surprised her by stepping forward and wrapping his small arms around her neck in a fierce hug that smelled like marinara sauce and little boy sweetness. "I think I would like you to come live with us," he whispered against her shoulder. Maya closed her eyes and held him close, feeling the weight of decision settle over her like fate itself. When she looked up, Dante was watching them with an expression of such intense satisfaction that it made her skin prickle with unease. "Vincent, take Enzo back to the table," Dante said quietly. "Order him dessert, whatever he wants." After they left, the alcove felt suddenly empty and charged with tension. Dante moved closer, his presence filling the space with dangerous electricity. "Well?" he asked. Maya looked down at the check in her hands, then back at his face. "I have conditions." "Name them." "I keep my apartment. I visit my grandmother whenever I want. And if I ever decide this isn't working, if I'm not helping him, or if I'm making things worse, I walk away with no interference." Dante's smile was predatory. "Agreed? With one addendum." "Which is?" "If you walk away, you'll discover that caring for my son has made you quite wealthy. Wealthy enough that you'll never need to work another day in your life. wealthy enough that leaving might feel less like freedom and more like exile. The threat wrapped in generosity was clear. Maya would be compensated so well that departure would mean abandoning not just Enzo, but financial security beyond her wildest dreams. It was a cage made of gold, but a cage nonetheless. And if you stay, you'll discover that being essential to my family comes with protections and privileges you can't imagine. You'll never want for anything, never fear for your safety, never question your value. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. You'll become part of something powerful and permanent, Maya. The question is whether you're brave enough to accept that kind of belonging. Maya folded the check carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket. The decision was made, had perhaps been made the moment she saw Enzo's tears and recognized her own childhood grief reflected in his dark eyes. "When do I start?" she asked. Dante's answering smile could have melted steel. "Tomorrow morning. Vincent will collect you at 8. Bring whatever matters to you. Everything else will be provided." As they walked back toward the main dining room, Maya caught sight of Enzo at their original table, carefully eating what appeared to be tiramisu while Vincent stood guard. The child looked up as they approached, and his face lit up with the first genuine smile she had seen from him. "Miss Maya, Vincent says you're going to come live with us." "That's right, sweetheart." "Will you help me with my trains tomorrow?" "I would love to." As Maya resumed her position beside the booth, helping Enzo navigate his dessert and listening to his excited chatter about model locomotives, she felt the weight of her new reality settling around her shoulders. She was no longer Maya Chen, invisible waitress struggling to survive. She was becoming something else entirely: protector, caregiver, and unwitting prisoner of her own competence. But watching Enzo's face glow with happiness as he described the elaborate track layouts they would build together, Maya realized that some cages were built not to imprison, but to protect. And for the first time in her adult life, she was about to discover what it felt like to be both captive and queen. The tiramisu disappeared under Enzo's careful ministrations, each spoonful savoured with the deliberate attention of a child who had learned not to take sweet things for granted. Maya sat beside him in the booth, acutely aware of Dante's presence across the table. The way his obsidian eyes tracked every interaction between her and his son with the focused intensity of a scientist observing a crucial experiment. "Miss Maya," Enzo said suddenly, lowering his spoon to look at her with earnest curiosity. "Do you know how to braid hair?" The question caught Maya off guard. Yes, I do. Why?" "Mama used to braid my hair when it got long. Papa doesn't know how." He glanced at his father with the gentle forgiveness of a child who understood that some skills simply didn't exist in the adult arsenal. Dante's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a muscle jumping beneath his olive skin. Maya caught the subtle reaction and felt something shift in her chest. Recognition of a man who commanded empires but couldn't perform the simple intimacies that children craved. "I could teach your papa how to braid," Maya offered gently. "Or I could braid it for you whenever you want." Enzo's face lit up with genuine delight. "Really? Could you braid it now? Just a little one?" Maya glanced at Dante, seeking permission. He gave an almost imperceptible nod, and she turned to face Enzo more fully. His dark hair was soft beneath her fingers, silky and slightly too long, falling in gentle waves that reminded her painfully of the Italian Renaissance paintings she'd studied in her brief semester of community college before money ran out. As she worked, separating strands and weaving them together with practiced ease, Maya became aware of the restaurant around them falling into a different kind of quiet. Not the tense silence that had greeted Dante's arrival, but something more curious. Other diners stealing glances at the unusual tableau of a Mafia boss watching a waitress braid his son's hair with the reverent attention most people reserve for religious ceremonies. "There," Maya said softly, securing the small braid with a rubber band from her apron pocket. "What do you think?" Enzo reached up to touch the braid with wonder, his fingers tracing the woven strands. "It feels like when Mama did it," he whispered, and Maya's throat tightened at the raw gratitude in his voice. "Your mama taught you well," Dante said quietly, speaking directly to Maya for the first time since returning from their private conversation. "He hasn't let anyone touch his hair since she died." The admission hung in the perfumed air like smoke, heavy with implications Maya was only beginning to understand. She looked down at Enzo, who had rested his head against her shoulder with the boneless trust of a child who had found exactly what he needed. "Miss Maya," he said sleepily, "will you sing to me tonight? Mama used to sing Italian lullabies." "I don't know any Italian lullabies," Maya admitted, "but I know some other songs. Would that be okay?" "Will you teach me the words?" "Of course." Giuseppe appeared at the table's edge, his nervous energy even more pronounced than before. He carried a leather folder that Maya recognized as the check presenter, but his hands shook slightly as he set it down beside Dante's elbow. "Mr. Torino," he said in heavily accented English, "everything tonight is complimentary, of course. It has been our honor to serve your family." Dante's gaze flicked to the folder, then back to Giuseppe's face. "The service tonight has been exceptional," he said, his voice carrying enough warmth to make the restaurant manager visibly sag with relief, particularly from Miss Maya. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks as Giuseppe's eyes widened with understanding. In the space of one evening, she had gone from invisible waitress to someone whose name was being spoken with respect by Dante Torino himself. "Miss Maya is a treasure," Giuseppe agreed quickly, his accent thickening with nervousness. "We are very fortunate to have her on our staff." "Not for much longer," Dante said casually, pulling out a money clip that was thicker than most novels. He withdrew several bills, hundreds, Maya realized with a shock, and placed them on the table with the negligent ease of someone for whom such amounts were loose change. "Sir?" Giuseppe's confusion was palpable. "Miss Maya will be taking a new position," Dante explained, peeling off another few hundreds. "Consider this severance pay and a bonus for exceptional service." Maya watched Giuseppe's face cycle through confusion, understanding, and barely concealed envy as he calculated the tip Dante had just left. It was more money than she made in 6 months, casually dispensed as if it were singles rather than the kind of cash that could change lives. "Of course, Mr. Torino. We wish Miss Maya every success in her new endeavours." After Giuseppe retreated, Maya found herself staring at the money with something approaching vertigo. "You didn't have to do that." "I don't do things I don't have to do," Dante replied simply. "Giuseppe will spread word that you left on good terms with generous compensation. No one will ask uncomfortable questions." The casual way he manipulated perception and controlled narrative was both impressive and terrifying. Maya realized she was seeing a master strategist in action, someone who thought 3 moves ahead of everyone else in the room. Enzo had fallen asleep against her shoulder, his breathing slow and even in a way that spoke to genuine peace rather than exhaustion. Maya found herself adjusting her position to better support his weight, her movements instinctive and protective. "He hasn't slept like that in public since the funeral," Dante observed quietly, his voice carrying a note she hadn't heard before, something that might have been wonder if she didn't know better than to attribute such vulnerable emotions to men who ruled through fear. "He feels safe," Maya said simply, "with you. With the idea of stability, of someone who understands what he needs without him having to explain it." Dante leaned forward slightly, his presence filling the space between them with dangerous electricity. "And what does he need, Maya, in your professional opinion?" There was challenge in his voice, but also genuine curiosity. Maya realized he was still testing her, still measuring her competence against his son's complicated requirements. "He needs routine," she said carefully, aware that her answer would help shape Enzo's future. "Not rigid structure, but predictable comfort. He needs someone who acknowledges his mother's memory without trying to replace her. He needs permission to grieve without being made to feel like his sadness is inconvenient. And he needs to feel essential to someone's happiness. Children who lose parents often develop a fear of being disposable, of being too much trouble. He needs to know that caring for him brings someone joy, not just obligation. Dante's dark eyes studied her face with laser intensity. You sound like you're speaking from experience. I am. The admission settled between them like a bridge, fragile but real, connecting her foster care survival to Enzo's current struggle. Maya felt exposed in a way that should have been terrifying, but Enzo's warm weight against her shoulder anchored her to the moment, reminded her why she was taking such risks. "Vincent," Dante called softly. The bodyguard materialized beside their table with silent efficiency. "Boss?" "Bring the car around. It's time to take Enzo home." As Vincent departed, Dante turned his attention back to Maya. "Will you ride with us? Enzo shouldn't wake up alone in the car." The request was reasonable, even considerate, but Maya understood that accepting meant crossing another threshold, meant seeing Dante's world from the inside rather than observing it from the safe distance of the restaurant's neutral territory. "All right," she said quietly. Dante's smile was sharp as broken glass and twice as beautiful. "Vincent will drive you home afterward to collect whatever you need for tomorrow." As if she were already his employee, already part of his household, already committed to the golden cage he was constructing around her with such elegant precision. Maya should have been angry at his presumption, should have asserted her independence, should have demanded the right to make her own transportation arrangements. Instead, she found herself adjusting Enzo's sleeping form more comfortably against her shoulder and wondering when protection had started feeling so much like home. "Miss Maya," Enzo mumbled sleepily, not quite awake but sensing movement around him. "I'm right here, sweetheart." "Are you really coming home with us?" Maya met Dante's gaze across the table, saw satisfaction and possessive calculation in equal measure, and realized she was already home. She just hadn't understood the address yet. "Yes," she whispered against Enzo's soft hair. "I'm really coming home with you." And as Dante's smile turned predatory with triumph, Maya Chen felt the last of her old life slip away like water through her fingers, leaving behind only the terrifying, exhilarating promise of becoming someone she had never imagined she could be. Maya's studio apartment had never felt smaller than it did at 7:30 a.m. on Wednesday morning, with Vincent's imposing silhouette filling her doorway like a mountain of controlled menace. He stood perfectly still while she gathered the remnants of her old life into 2 worn duffel bags, his winter storm eyes cataloguing every detail of her modest existence with the professional interest of someone trained to assess threats and assets. The apartment told the story of her desperation in ways that made her cheeks burn with shame. Ramen noodle cups stacked in the corner because she couldn't afford groceries, medical bills spread across her kitchen table like tarot cards predicting financial ruin, a mattress on the floor because furniture was a luxury she couldn't justify when her grandmother's experimental cancer treatment cost more per month than Maya earned in 6. "You ready?" Vincent asked, his voice carrying the particular roughness of someone who had seen enough poverty to recognize it without judgment. Maya zipped the second bag and looked around the space that had been her refuge for 3 years. Everything that mattered fit into 2 bags, some clothes, a few books, the wooden jewellery box her grandmother had given her for her 16th birthday, and a photograph of her parents she barely remembered but couldn't bear to lose. "This is it," she said quietly. The drive to Dante's estate took 25 minutes through increasingly affluent neighbourhoods, the urban decay of her world gradually giving way to manicured lawns and iron gates that spoke of wealth so old it had fossilized into respectability. Maya pressed her face to the armoured window and watched her future unfold in marble fountains and imported Italian cypress trees. The Torino mansion rose from its landscaped grounds like something from a Renaissance painting, all honey-coloured stone and arched windows with enough square footage to house a small village. Security cameras tracked their approach with mechanical precision, and Maya counted at least 6 men positioned around the property's perimeter, their casual poses failing to disguise the deadly competence of their surveillance. Vincent parked in a circular driveway that could have accommodated a dozen cars, the black SUV looking modest against the backdrop of such ostentatious wealth. Maya climbed out on shaking legs, her duffel bags suddenly feeling pathetic against the grandeur surrounding her. "Miss Maya!" Enzo's voice cut through her intimidation like warm honey, and she turned to see him racing down the mansion's front steps with the boundless energy of a child who had slept through the night for the first time in months. He launched himself into her arms with complete trust, his small body warm and solid against her chest. "You came," he said breathlessly. "I was worried you might change your mind." Maya's throat tightened at the naked vulnerability in his voice. "I promised I would come, didn't I?" "Grown-ups sometimes break promises," he said matter-of-factly, the words carrying more weight than any 6-year-old should have to bear. "Some grown-ups do," Maya agreed honestly, "but I try very hard to keep mine." Dante appeared in the mansion's doorway, and Maya's breath caught involuntarily. In the morning light, wearing dark jeans and a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, he looked less like a dangerous criminal and more like an impossibly handsome single father. But his eyes remained obsidian sharp, and the way Vincent straightened to military attention reminded Maya exactly what kind of man she was dealing with. "Welcome home," Dante said, his voice carrying subtle warmth that felt like a reward for accepting his offer. Home. The words settled over Maya like a weighted blanket, comforting and suffocating in equal measure. She had never lived anywhere that felt like home. The foster houses had been temporary shelters, her apartment a necessity rather than sanctuary. But looking at this mansion with its obvious wealth and hidden dangers, Maya wondered if home was always supposed to feel quite so much like walking willingly into beautiful captivity. "Let me show you your room," Dante continued, gesturing for her to follow him into the mansion's soaring foyer. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior, marble floors polished to mirror brightness, oil paintings that probably cost more than her annual salary, and a sweeping staircase that belonged in a movie about European royalty. Maya's suite was on the 2nd floor, connected to Enzo's room by a door she suspected was never meant to be locked. The space was larger than her entire apartment, with a king-sized bed, sitting area, and bathroom that featured a clawfoot tub she could have swimming in. French doors opened onto a balcony, overlooking gardens that looked like they required a full-time staff to maintain. "Everything you might need has been provided," Dante said, gesturing toward a walk-in closet that contained clothing in her exact size. "If anything is missing, Rosa will handle it immediately." Maya stared at the clothes, designer labels she recognized from magazine advertisements, fabrics that felt like silk beneath her fingers, shoes that cost more than her monthly rent. Someone had researched her measurements with the same thoroughness they'd used to investigate her background, had transformed her from invisible waitress to properly dressed family employee with corporate efficiency. "This is too much," she said quietly. "This is what Enzo's caregiver requires," Dante corrected. "You represent my family now, Maya. You'll dress accordingly." The subtle command in his voice made her skin prickle with unease. She was being dressed like a doll, styled to fit his vision of what the Torino family's domestic staff should look like. But before she could voice her discomfort, Enzo appeared at her elbow, his face bright with excitement. "Miss Maya, come see my trains. I set up a new track just for you." His enthusiasm was infectious, and Maya found herself being tugged toward his room with the insistent pressure of a child who had been waiting all morning to share his treasures. Enzo's bedroom was a wonderland of expensive toys arranged with museum-like precision, but his focus was entirely on the elaborate electric train set that dominated one corner. "Papa bought this from Germany," Enzo explained proudly, his small hands gesturing toward miniature buildings and tiny painted figures. "It has real smoke and lights and everything. Want to see it work?" For the next hour, Maya found herself transported into Enzo's world of locomotives and imaginary journeys, listening to his detailed explanations of train schedules and cargo manifests with the serious attention she would have given a doctoral dissertation. His knowledge was encyclopedic, his passion genuine, and his need for someone to care about his interests so profound that Maya felt her heart crack slightly with sympathy. "Your mamma must have loved watching you play with your trains," she said gently during a brief pause in his locomotive lecture. Enzo's face dimmed slightly. "She said I was going to be an engineer when I grew up. She was going to take me to see real trains in Switzerland." "Maybe we could do that someday," Maya suggested. "When you're older, we could ride real trains and you could tell me how they're different from your models." The hope that bloomed in Enzo's dark eyes was almost too bright to witness. "Really? You would want to do that?" "I would love to do that. Even if it takes a long time, even if I'm not little anymore." The question revealed the depth of his abandonment fears, the terror that care was conditional on his continued childhood charm. Maya knelt beside the train set and took his small hands in hers. "Enzo, listening to you talk about trains makes me happy. It doesn't matter if you're 6 or 16 or 60. If you want to tell me about locomotives, I want to hear about them." His answering smile could have powered the mansion's electrical grid. They spent the morning building elaborate track configurations while Maya absorbed the rhythms of the household around them. Rosa, the housekeeper, brought them fresh fruit and Italian pastries with the maternal efficiency of someone accustomed to caring for motherless children. Vincent maintained discreet surveillance from strategic positions throughout the mansion, and Dante appeared periodically, ostensibly checking on business matters, but actually observing Maya's interactions with his son with the focused intensity of a scientist monitoring a crucial experiment. By noon, Maya felt as if she had been living in the mansion for weeks rather than hours. Enzo had claimed her completely, demanding her attention for every small triumph and seeking her comfort for every minor disappointment. She found herself settling into maternal rhythms with ease that should have been alarming, cutting his sandwiches into perfect triangles, listening to his rambling stories about imaginary train adventures, providing the constant stream of gentle attention that fed his starved spirit. "Miss Maya," he said suddenly, looking up from his model locomotive with expression of absolute seriousness, "are you going to be my new mama?" The question hit Maya like cold water, and she felt Dante's presence in the doorway even before she turned to see him standing there, his face carefully neutral, but his dark eyes sharp with interest. "I'm going to take care of you," Maya said carefully. "I'm going to make sure you're safe and happy and loved, but your mama will always be your mama, even though she can't be here with you anymore." Enzo considered this with the gravity of a child, accustomed to passing adult complexities. "So you'll be like a second mama? If that's what you'd like me to be." "I would like that very much," he said solemnly, then surprised her by throwing his arms around her neck in a fierce hug. "I love you, second mama." Maya's throat closed completely, and she held him tight against her chest while trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. In the space of 24 hours, she had gone from invisible waitress to essential family member, from economic desperation to luxurious security, from solitude to being desperately needed by a child who had claimed her heart with terrifying completeness. When she looked up, Dante was watching them with an expression of such intense satisfaction that it made her skin prickle with unease. His smile was sharp as broken glass and twice as dangerous, the look of a man who had just acquired something precious and had no intention of ever letting it go. "Welcome to the family, Maya," he said quietly, and the words sounded less like greeting than like the closing of a very beautiful, very expensive cage. The call from Mercy General came at 3:47 p.m. on Maya's third day in the mansion, Rosa's gentle voice carrying the news that would reshape everything Maya thought she understood about Dante Torino's capacity for both generosity and control. "Your grandmother is asking for you," Rosa said, appearing in the doorway of Enzo's playroom where Maya was helping him construct an elaborate Lego cityscape. "The hospital says she's been moved to a private room in the VIP wing." Maya's hands stilled on the bright plastic bricks. "VIP wing! There must be some mistake. My grandmother has basic insurance." Rosa's smile was gentle but knowing. "Mr. Torino handles all medical arrangements for family members now. The car is waiting whenever you're ready." Family members. The phrase hit Maya like a physical blow, reminding her that accepting Dante's offer had meant more than just caring for Enzo. It had meant becoming part of something larger and more complicated than she had fully understood. "Miss Maya?" Enzo looked up from his construction project, his dark eyes wide with concern. "Is your nonna sick?" Maya's throat tightened at hearing him use the Italian word for grandmother, another small sign of how completely he had claimed her as family. "She's very sick, sweetheart. I need to go see her." "Can I come with you? I want to meet your nonna." "Hospitals aren't really places for little boys," Maya said gently, but Enzo's face crumpled with disappointment. "But she's your family, and you're my second mama, so she's my family too, right?" The logic was perfectly childlike and completely devastating. Maya glanced at Rosa, seeking guidance, but the housekeeper's expression remained carefully neutral. "Let me call your papa and ask what he thinks," Maya said finally. Dante's response was immediate and decisive. "Take him," he said, his voice carrying through the phone with crisp authority. "Enzo needs to understand that family supports each other through difficult times. And Maya?" "Yes?" "Your grandmother will receive the best possible care. Dr. Castellano is flying in from Milan. He's one of the world's leading oncologists. Whatever she needs, she'll have." The casual way he dispensed medical miracles, worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, made Maya's head spin. "Dante, I can't possibly repay—" "You're not being asked to repay anything. You're being given what family members receive. There's a difference." The distinction was important to him, she realized. This wasn't charity or loan. It was the exercise of patriarchal power, the way a traditional Italian family patriarch took care of his household. But the implications terrified her almost as much as they comforted her. An hour later, Maya found herself walking through Mercy General's gleaming VIP wing with Enzo's small hand clasped firmly in hers, both of them dressed in the expensive casual wear that had appeared in their respective closets like magic. The difference between this floor and the general population wards was staggering. Marble instead of linoleum, oil paintings instead of institutional posters, and a nurse-to-patient ratio that spoke of the kind of medical attention money could buy. Her grandmother's new room was larger than Maya's old apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and medical equipment that looked like it belonged on a spaceship. But all of Maya's attention focused on the small figure in the hospital bed, her grandmother's face peaceful in a way it hadn't been for months. "Nonna," Maya whispered, using the Italian word without thinking. Eleanor Chen's eyes opened slowly, and her face transformed with joy at seeing her granddaughter. At 83, she had been beautiful once, and traces of that beauty remained despite the ravages of cancer and chemotherapy. But her eyes were still sharp as razors, missing nothing. "Maya, darling," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "And who is this handsome young man?" Enzo stepped forward with the careful politeness of a child who had been well trained in meeting new people. "I'm Enzo," he said solemnly. "I'm Maya's little boy now." Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly, and Maya felt heat flood her cheeks. "It's complicated, Nonna. This is Enzo Torino. I'm taking care of him." "Torino?" Eleanor repeated thoughtfully, her keen gaze moving between Maya and the child. "That's an interesting development." Maya sank into the chair beside the bed, and Enzo climbed carefully onto her lap, settling against her chest with the complete trust of a child who had found his safe harbour. Eleanor watched this interaction with the sharp attention of someone who had survived the Depression, 3 wars, and 40 years of marriage to a man who hadn't always been gentle. "Tell me," Eleanor said quietly, "about your new situation." Over the next 20 minutes, Maya found herself explaining the events of the past 3 days. The crying child at Benedetto's, Dante's offer, the mansion that felt like a cross between palace and fortress, the way Enzo had claimed her heart with terrifying completeness. Throughout her narrative, her grandmother listened with the patient attention of someone who understood that the most important stories were often the most complicated ones. "He's beautiful," Eleanor said finally, smiling at Enzo, who had been listening to the adult conversation with the serious attention of a child accustomed to passing grown-up complexities. "And clearly very attached to you." "She makes the best pancakes," Enzo informed Eleanor gravely, "shaped like animals, and she knows all the good bedtime stories." "Does she now?" Eleanor's eyes twinkled with amusement. Maya was always good with stories. Even as a little girl, she could make the most ordinary things sound magical. Maya felt her throat tighten with emotion. Her grandmother had been her anchor through the chaos of foster care, the one person who had never stopped fighting for her, never stopped believing she was worth loving. Seeing her in this beautiful room, receiving care that would have been impossible without Dante's intervention, felt like witnessing a miracle and a trap simultaneously. "Nonna," Maya said carefully, "the doctors say the new treatment is working." "Dr. Castellano is very optimistic," Eleanor agreed. "He's a remarkable man, very expensive, I imagine." "You don't need to worry about the cost." Eleanor's laugh was soft but knowing. "Oh, my darling girl, I've lived too long to believe that anything this expensive comes without a price. The question is whether you understand what you're paying." Before Maya could respond, Enzo spoke up. "My papa says family takes care of family," he said earnestly. "And Maya is family now, so her nonna is family too." Eleanor's expression softened as she looked at the child. "Your papa sounds like a wise man." "He's the best papa in the whole world," Enzo said loyally. "He bought me trains from Germany, and he makes sure nobody can hurt us, and he found Maya just when I needed a second mama the most." The innocent devotion in Enzo's voice was heartbreaking in its completeness. Eleanor reached out to stroke his dark hair, her movements gentle despite the IV line in her hand. "You're very lucky to have each other," she said softly. They spent another hour together, Maya reading from one of Enzo's favourite storybooks while her grandmother dozed fitfully and the autumn light faded outside the hospital windows. When visiting hours ended, Enzo hugged Eleanor goodbye with the easy affection of a child who had decided she belonged to him now, just like Maya did. "Will you come see Nonna again?" he asked as they walked toward the elevator. "Would you like me to?" "Yes, she can meet my trains, and maybe Rosa can teach her to make Italian cookies." Maya's chest tightened at his casual assumption that her grandmother would become a permanent part of their strange, beautiful, dangerous new family structure. But watching Eleanor's face light up at Enzo's invitation, Maya realized that her grandmother was already being drawn into Dante's web of protection and control just as surely as she had been. The ride home was quiet, Enzo falling asleep against Maya's shoulder while Vincent navigated the evening traffic with professional efficiency. As they pulled through the mansion's gates, Maya caught sight of Dante standing on the front steps, his silhouette sharp against the golden light spilling from the house's windows. "Papa!" Enzo called out as soon as the car stopped, his exhaustion forgotten in his excitement to share the day's adventures. He raced up the steps and launched himself into Dante's arms, chattering about Eleanor's room and the stories Maya had read and the promise of future visits. Dante listened with the patient attention of a father genuinely interested in his son's experiences, but his dark eyes remained fixed on Maya's face, reading something there that made his expression shift toward satisfaction. "Did you enjoy meeting Maya's grandmother?" he asked Enzo. "She's wonderful. She has the same eyes as Maya, and she knows lots of stories about when Maya was little, and she said I could call her Nonna Eleanor if I want to." "And do you want to?" "Yes, she's family now, right? Like Maya is family?" "Exactly like Maya is family," Dante confirmed, his gaze never leaving Maya's face. "Family takes care of family, doesn't it?" "Always," Enzo agreed solemnly. As they walked into the mansion together, Enzo's chatter filling the marble foyer with warmth, Maya realized that her grandmother's miraculous recovery was just another golden thread in the web Dante was weaving around her. Every kindness, every generous gesture, every display of protective power was designed to make leaving not just impossible, but unthinkable. She was no longer just caring for Enzo. She was anchored to this world by her grandmother's life, by a child's desperate love, by her own growing attachment to the strange, dangerous, beautiful family she had somehow become essential to. And looking at Dante's satisfied smile as he watched Enzo describe the day's adventures with animated gestures, Maya realized that she had never actually had a choice at all. 3 weeks into her new life, Maya had fallen into rhythms that felt as natural as breathing. She woke each morning to Enzo's soft knock on her door, helped him dress in the expensive clothes that appeared in his closet with mysterious regularity, and guided him through breakfast conversations that ranged from locomotive specifications to philosophical questions about whether dinosaurs would have liked trains. The mansion's vast kitchen had become their sanctuary, a place where she taught him to measure flour for pancakes while he taught her the Italian words Rosa used when she thought no one was listening. "Bello bambino," Enzo said solemnly, carefully cracking eggs into a mixing bowl with the concentration of a surgeon. "That means beautiful boy. Rosa says it about me when she thinks I'm sleeping." Maya smiled, wiping flour from his dark hair with gentle fingers. "Rosa is right. You are definitely a bello bambino." "And you're bella donna," he announced proudly. "That means beautiful lady. Papa taught me that one." The casual way Enzo quoted his father made Maya's pulse quicken slightly. Dante had been travelling for business the past 5 days, and his absence had allowed Maya to settle into her role without the constant weight of his calculating attention. But his presence lived in every corner of the mansion, in the security protocols that governed their daily routines, in the expensive clothes that appeared like magic, in the way even the household staff moved with the careful precision of people who served someone whose displeasure could be deadly. "Miss Maya," Enzo said suddenly, his voice taking on the serious tone that meant important questions were coming. "When Papa comes home tonight, will you still have time for just me? Or will you have to take care of him too?" The question revealed layers of anxiety that Maya was still learning to navigate. Enzo had been the centre of his father's attention for 18 months, but that attention had been filtered through grief and helplessness. Now Maya provided the maternal care that allowed Dante to be a father rather than a desperate single parent, but Enzo worried that sharing her might mean losing her. "Taking care of your papa is different from taking care of you," Maya said carefully, kneeling to meet his eyes. "You're my little boy. You'll always be my priority. But he's your boss. He's your father, and my job is to help your family be happy and healthy. That includes both of you." Enzo considered this with the gravity of a child accustomed to passing adult complexities. "So you belong to both of us?" The question hit Maya like cold water, forcing her to confront truths she had been avoiding. Did she belong to them? Had accepting Dante's protection and Enzo's love meant surrendering her autonomy so completely that belonging was the only accurate term? "I choose to be here," she said finally, "because I love you and because I want to help your family." "Good," Enzo said, apparently satisfied, "because I love you too much to share you with anyone except Papa." The possessiveness in his voice was both touching and unsettling, another reminder that she was being absorbed into a world where love and ownership were often indistinguishable. The security alarm's soft chime announced Dante's arrival 20 minutes before Maya heard his voice in the foyer, Rosa's greeting warm with genuine affection and relief. Enzo abandoned his breakfast immediately, racing toward the sound of his father's return with the boundless energy of a child who had been counting hours. Maya remained in the kitchen, ostensibly cleaning up their cooking mess, but actually giving father and son space for their reunion. Through the doorway, she could hear Enzo's animated chatter about train configurations and Italian lessons and the chocolate chip cookies Maya had helped him bake as a welcome home surprise. "Where is Maya?" Dante's voice carried clearly through the marble corridors, and the question sent an unexpected thrill through Maya's chest. "In the kitchen. Come see what we made you." Footsteps approached, and Maya turned to find Dante filling the kitchen doorway with his presence, 5 days of travel evident in the slight shadows beneath his eyes, but his expensive suit as perfectly tailored as ever. Enzo clung to his hand, practically vibrating with excitement as he pointed toward the plate of cookies cooling on the marble counter. "We used Mama's recipe," Enzo announced proudly. "Rosa showed us, and Maya helped me measure everything exactly right." Something flickered across Dante's face at the mention of his deceased wife, but it was gone too quickly for Maya to interpret. He moved toward the cookies with careful attention, selecting one and taking a deliberate bite, while Enzo watched with the intensity of a chef awaiting judgment from a food critic. "Perfect," Dante said finally, and Enzo's face lit up like sunrise. "Just like Mama used to make them." "Maya says we can make them whenever I want," Enzo said. "She says cooking together is one of the best parts of being a family." Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks as Dante's dark eyes fixed on her face. She had been speaking from her heart, sharing the domestic wisdom she had absorbed during her brief stay with the one good foster mother she'd known. But hearing her words repeated back in Dante's presence made them feel presumptuous, as if she had overstepped boundaries she didn't fully understand. "Maya is right," Dante said quietly, his voice carrying a note she couldn't identify. "Cooking together is very important for families." The approval in his tone should have relieved her, but instead it made her skin prickle with unease. Every interaction with Dante felt like a test she didn't know she was taking. Every word weighted with implications she couldn't decode. "Enzo," Dante continued, "why don't you go find Vincent? He has something for you from Germany." "Another train?" Enzo's eyes widened with delight. "Go see." Enzo raced from the kitchen with the speed of a child chasing Christmas morning, leaving Maya alone with Dante for the first time since accepting his offer. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions and the particular tension that seemed to crackle whenever they occupied the same space. "You've done well," Dante said finally, moving closer with the controlled grace of a predator who had never learned to doubt his own power. "Enzo looks better than he has since Isabella died. He's a remarkable child. He just needed someone to understand what he was missing." And what was he missing, Maya? The question seemed simple, but Maya had learned to be wary of Dante's simple questions. They usually concealed depths that could drown the unwary. "Maternal attention," she said carefully. "The kind of care that doesn't try to fix or distract, just accepts and comforts. The kind of care you never received as a child." It wasn't a question, and Maya felt her defences rise at the casual way he wielded her trauma like a scalpel. "Foster care teaches you what children need by showing you what they lack." Dante stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne and something darker underneath. Danger, perhaps, or the metallic tang of a world where violence was always an option. "And what do you need, Maya?" The question caught her completely off guard. In 3 weeks of careful observation and calculated generosity, Dante had never asked about her needs, her desires, her own emotional requirements. He had provided for her physically, clothes, shelter, security, but had never acknowledged that she might be more than just a solution to his son's problems. "I need to know that Enzo is safe and happy," she said quietly. "That's what you want for Enzo! What do you want for yourself?" Maya stared into his obsidian eyes, searching for the trap she was certain this question contained, but she saw only genuine curiosity, the focused attention of someone who was finally ready to see her as more than just a maternal resource for his son. "I want to matter," she said before she could stop herself. "I want to be essential to someone's happiness instead of just convenient." The admission cost her something, revealed a vulnerability she had spent years protecting. But Dante's expression didn't shift toward the predatory satisfaction she expected. Instead, something that might have been understanding flickered in his dark eyes. "You matter to Enzo," he said quietly. "Yes, you matter to me." The words hung in the kitchen's perfumed air, like smoke from an expensive cigar. Maya felt her pulse hammer against her throat as she tried to pass the implications of such a statement from a man who chose his words with surgical precision. "As Enzo's caregiver," she said carefully. "As Enzo's caregiver," he agreed, "and as the woman who gave my son back his smile, as the person who made my house feel like a home for the first time since Isabella died." Maya's chest tightened with dangerous warmth. She was being seduced, she realized. Not sexually, though the undercurrent of attraction was unmistakable, but emotionally. Dante was offering her exactly what she had admitted craving, the security of being essential, of mattering beyond her usefulness. "Dante! Papa! Papa, come see!" Enzo's voice cut through the tension like a blade, and they stepped apart as the child raced back into the kitchen, clutching a miniature locomotive. "It's a Swiss mountain train. Vincent says it can climb real hills." "Show me," Dante said, his voice immediately transforming from intimate to paternal as he knelt to examine Enzo's treasure. But as Maya watched father and son exclaim over the tiny train's engineering, she remained acutely aware of Dante's presence, of the dangerous warmth that had bloomed in her chest at his words, of the way he had looked at her as if she were precious rather than merely useful. And she realized with crystalline clarity that she was falling, not just for the child who had claimed her heart, but for the dangerous man who was offering her everything she had ever wanted at a price she was only beginning to understand.